I grew up reading National Geographic, the World Almanac, and Book of Facts. And it was like, where did they go? How did they not transition to digital? And then we studied the space. We analyzed the content they were producing for social media. We thought, there's a content gap. No one's telling these stories. So let's do it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the content category. I'm super excited to be here with Steve. Steve is CEO and founder of Underknown. Steve, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's great to be here.
To give context a little bit more about why we're having this interview and having this conversation is we spent a lot of time looking at the content category. There's well over 1,000 companies that are creating content, and it's quite overwhelming. But one of the companies that really stood out to us was Underknown. Underknown has a really unique approach, not only the content that they create, the creativity of the content they have and the brands that they've built, but their method of distributing that content across social networks or social channels. It's really interesting. And I think one of the up and coming and probably one of the most impressive companies within the content category overall. Steve, again, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. Maybe before we jump into questions, you're going to I think you have a quick visual that you could share with us so that the audience at least has a baseline of who is Underknown, and then we'll jump into questions.
I'm Steve Hulford, the CEO of Underknown. So I'll just walk you quickly through what Underknown is. I like to think of us as a modern media company, and we make short form web series. We create web series that we publish on social channels, and we're focused on the humanities, science, history, geography, and culture. It's a passion of ours. We have a personal mission to entertain, educate, and inform young people about these incredible stories in the field of humanity. It's a category in content that we think has a content gap, one that is not as competitive as others. And this is our team. We've got a headquarters in Toronto and over almost 100 of us working around the world with a team in Toronto supporting that team. We like to say that our great passion is boiling down complex subjects in a fun and engaging way. So some of our numbers, over 35 million followers across almost 35 digital channels. We're publishing on Snapchat, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Last year in 2020, we served over 1 billion ads on those videos. We are producing almost 100 original stories every month that get translated into as many as 9 languages. So I like to say you got to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. We make one original video, publish it on multiple channels, and then translate it into many languages. So we have a really efficient workflow behind the scenes that allow us to do that and scale. So one of the most popular show that we produce is called What If? It's where we use a hypothetical question as an entry point to discuss real science with young people. And it's published on Snapchat, Facebook, and YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. We won a Webby Award last year. We're super proud of it. What If? It is watched by 30 million people every single month, and it's translated into 9 languages. As well, How to Survive is another show we have on Snapchat, Facebook, and YouTube. Here, we like to say in What If, the viewer almost always ends in death. You can imagine all these fantastical ideas of what if the moon smashed into Earth. In this scenario, we're always surviving. So it's the antidote to what if. What if how to survive an earthquake, how to survive COVID. And we do try to follow, if we can, it's great when our stories line up with something trending in the news. Crazy Creatures is another one where we look at strange behaviors and adaptations of animals, large and small. And this is a show that is on Snapchat and Facebook. We have the capabilities with teams in markets, like we do Hindi out of India, we do Spanish out of Mexico and Colombia. We're in the Netherlands doing Dutch. We've got a team in France and Quebec doing French, Portuguese. We have a team in Brazil, Germany. Italy is actually a lot of them here in Canada, and Japanese in Japan, Mandarin in Hong Kong. So international channels are a big part of it. It makes up 25% of our programmatic revenue. And it's very, very high margin on translating this content into the new languages. And we always have a local producer that understands the culture. Sometimes the scripts get changed. Sometimes the shots get changed. And some episodes aren't published at all. And we're starting to get into the fans, like our Spanish channels, for example, over 5 million fans watching our content in Spanish. And now they're making recommendations that are getting produced that start in English and then go into Spanish. I'd like to say we're very data driven. So much of content production in the past was intuition. And I think what makes a modern media company is the focus on a data practice. We have data scientists on staff, and it's always it's data first, intuition second. And we are constantly analyzing data. Every video we create that gets posted has had some market research done on it before these videos get sent back to producers to say, you need to recut your opening. It's not engaging enough, is in everything that we do. And we've built some software that my background is as a software entrepreneur, and have spent 10 years building a platform that media companies used to manage user-generated content. So that tool set, it was a company that I built up with some partners and sold in 2015. And it was a workflow solution for major media companies. We help them make video content more efficient. So I'm taking all those learnings and applying it to Underknown. And we've built our own software to manage our video assets, to distribute our video assets. And we're bringing together insights for our producers from all the data that's out there. So it's like an explorer. The video starts, the video producer uploads it, and then it travels to Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, and all that data comes back to the video producer for them to learn about what they can do better, how the video performed. So we're very data focused. And we test all of our ideas. So we'll do polls, we'll do story ideas and images on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. And if something performs really well there, it goes to our ideation team. And in the ideation team, they may be testing concepts with our social teams on these platforms. And then once a video gets created, it almost always goes on Facebook for sure, but only the top ones, the top performers go on YouTube, and then the top of the top go on Snapchat. So we really think of it as a funnel, funneling down to Snapchat. And we use Facebook as a market research tool. It also is somewhere where we generate a lot of revenue, and platforms like Instagram and TikTok are great ways to get really fast insight on story ideas. And we're working on new shows. So we have those 3 out there in the world. People are enjoying them, and we're working on new ones. Should you be scared? So in this scenario, people learn about how scared should I be of X? Now we're studying the origins of food. We're doing a history show where we take the viewer back on a mission to bring history into the present. And we're colorizing all of our history footage. One thing we've learned through data is throw black and white footage up in front of 13 to 24-year-olds and they stop watching. So we're colorizing everything. Your body on, that was a theme we learned was really popular on Snapchat. Big spenders versus debunker. That's one where we debunk conspiracy theories. So we're always looking to create new shows. And when we have a show that we like, that the audience really likes, we'll scale that up and produce it for all those platforms. So that's Underknown.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think.
Oh, my pleasure.
It really gives a great overview of not only what you built, the reach of your content, the type of content, and you're not just a media producer. There is technology behind, and the process in which you actually create and distribute content is very data driven, which is what makes you very unique, I think, in the content space. Now, before I jump into questions, because I have some questions follow up based on the slides that you presented, but I'm just curious, is there a backstory behind why you started Underknown?
I guess the origin story was, as I said, I was working for 10 years on a software platform where we provided software to media companies. But really, I loved content. And I started collaborating with the chief creative officer of the company that purchased my previous company. We started collaborating on content ideas. I did a ton of research on the new media company, and I discovered actually the business model of the new media company is a lot like the SaaS business. You've got lots of different digital channels and you're producing content and putting them out there. I think of these channels as ATM networks, and you feed them with videos and the money flows back into your bank account and you get reoccurring revenue, not recurring revenue, reoccurring revenue. And I thought that was a lot like the SaaS world, and that the new media, you didn't need a sales team. These platforms did all the sales for you. So it was a light bulb went off. And then we started to do some insights into my passion, and my partner's passions is the humanities, geography, history, science, culture. I grew up reading National Geographic, the World Almanac and Book of Facts, the Book of Lists, Ripley's Believe It or Not. And it was like, where did they go? How did they not transition to digital? And then we studied the space, discovered that History Channel, Discovery, National Geographic were the leaders on social media. And then when we analyzed the content they were producing for social media, we thought there's a content gap. No one's telling these stories. So let's do it. And that's what it started with. We spent 2016 doing experiments. We produced 50 videos. Some of them I made myself, my partners made. We had a lot of viral hits. And we used that we did a friends round, raised $1 million in early 17 through a friends round. And then that started the whole journey, which has now led to, 35 different digital channels.
You highlighted on your focus, actually the part of the origin was you guys had a passion for the science and humanities content, and that's the route you started and saw that gap. And just building off your last point, I'm curious, what's interesting about companies like yourselves is that you create multiple brands and content around those brands. And I'm just curious, why is it important to have a brand? And when creating content, do you normally start with a variety of content that you send to resonate with the audience and group them together, and that's a brand? Or do you start with the brand and build content outwards? I'm just curious on the branding and the reach of branding, the branding channels, and why you have so many.
Sure. Yeah. We think of us, we're a family of brands. Each show, I think for it to really resonate with fans and to draw fans, you really need to have a very focused format. And that format is what I think necessitates having a brand around it. If it's Crazy Creatures, yeah, and then we do a lot of work on what's the story arc. And then we really test those formats to find what resonates with the users. And then we just feed them tons of that. So for us to do a show, it has to have an unlimited amount of subjects. So that if you scale it up, you need to be able to make potentially 1,000 of these videos over the course of many years. And it's not that you could create a brand, or we haven't been able, that is about one subject and then do it every day. And then that becomes the business. So maybe you could if it was a news outlet or a news organization. So we think of it as putting out lots of different shows inside geography, history, science, and culture. When we started, we created one brand and we did geography, history, science, culture in one digital channel. And what we noticed was you can't have broad subjects on a digital channel. It has to be super narrowly focused. Otherwise, the way these algorithms work, Kyle, you might like history and I might like geography, and I love that one geography video enough to follow the channel, but then they kept feeding me other subjects that didn't resonate with me, and your channel will really never take off. So you really need to split them out into lots of different channels. And then when it comes to the creation of IP, that's really what we're trying to do here, is create IP. In the case of What If, we're turning that into a television show. We've created a book. There was a podcast. We don't imagine we'll do that with every single show, but we recognize that the television industry is looking for proof before they make their big investments. And what better proof than to say 18 to 34-year-old males love this show and they watch these episodes like crazy. So we partnered with Thunderbird, the production company up in Vancouver, and they're working on developing What If into a television show. And they're using the data to inform what goes into which episodes to pick.
Interesting. No, I think you made a really unique point in trying to find the right balance of keeping the audience focused and engaged in a particular theme, but also keeping that theme just wide enough so you can continue to create content on top of it without getting siloed and stuck. And the other interesting part, and we saw this a lot in gaming, where there's a lot of testing and trial and error and figuring out what is the right IP that's going to resonate and can really blow up in a way that people are just going to love, and take that and expand that to all formats. And it's actually funny because you saw more often than not, gaming companies would take IP that's already been successful and then turn it into a game, versus and the content creation and IP creation is so difficult to find a winner. But it's interesting that you guys continue to find that those themes, test on those themes, find the right content balance and focus, and build off of that.
Yeah, we have succeeded through failure. One example of that, like what if we created 300 videos in 2017. We did 3 what if videos. We saw lots of popular themes. That channel's no longer operational, but out of it came what if. We did a show called According to Science. It did not really resonate, but there was a theme inside it that was how to survive. Anything to do with survival did really well. So we doubled down and went in that direction.
Interesting. You talked about it already in your presentation, and I'm just curious because I want to bring it up and get your thought process on this. And your idea of the new media is, it seems as though content creation, do you believe it's still an art form, or is it more data driven, or is it a combination of both?
I think it's definitely an art form, but the data, what we've never really had access to. I worked in the television industry, and audience relations was one individual over in the corner there. They didn't play a large role necessarily in what informed the television, these networks, in terms of what they were doing. Whereas now we have access to real-time data out in the real world, and the opportunity to experiment is so quick, easy, and inexpensive to do that it does, if you can really lean into it, it does a marvelous job of making your art travel farther and reach more and more audiences.
Interesting.
So I think if we think of all the people on our teams, most of them are the artists, the content creators, but there's a team of data science people that help guide and direct.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, because going back to your earlier point where you're talking about according to science, and you could probably create some really amazing content, but what resonated was how to survive, and then shifting the artist team's gears, focusing a little bit more about how to create content for that theme versus the others, and then that really exploding outwards.
It's been very humbling to come up with ideas of shows you'd like to create as a producer, and I think of myself as a producer, but then have to kill them. And we say there's no sacred cows. The initial channel we launched, we killed it last year. We killed According to Science. I think the shows that we shut down are as important as the ones that we launch.
Interesting. I want to shift gears a little bit, focusing on that aspect of the presentation that talks a little bit more about data-driven. And one of the things that is really impressive about you guys is that you can create really unique short form content at scale. And I want to dive in a little bit deeper on this. What is that process of creating content? You talked a little bit before, but there's a lot of testing. But can you share maybe a little bit more details on the process of creating content? Is it third parties? Is it your team? It's bouncing off the walls of ideas around a brand? Like, how does this engine work?
My background is digital workflow. When I imagine the new media company, when we started it and we launched and we did our original business plan, I remember thinking, do we start with the software or do we start with the content and find an audience? And it was, pretty clear that we had to start with the content and then find the audience. The software would come later. Our first initial years, we were using off the shelf software and then stringing things together with bean cans and duct tape, I like to say. And now over the last 2 years, we've been building a software tool. And for the most part, it's table stakes. It's a video CMS. It's distribution tools. So we can license the content and publish it out to other platforms. What's coming next is pulling in all the data insights from the different platforms and giving that back to the video producer. It's our data warehouse and then our producer dashboard. And then laid over top of this is a workflow tool that all the scheduling, every aspect of the content production process in workflow. So it starts out with ideation. So we're getting thousands of story ideas from fans. We have a team dedicated to finding those story ideas, feeding them into the ideation team, and then they rank them. We have a criteria for each show as to whether that would be a good idea or not. And then once those stories get approved, they go into the production slate and they get assigned to various producers. But first, it goes to our research team. And we have a team of researchers, all with science backgrounds. They studied science in university. And they'll go out on the internet and they'll find first and second research data from either like the source or publications who've written about the source material. And we find out, what does the science say? Or what's the research say? They create a research package that's then, so when the video producer gets assigned to a story, the first thing they get's the research package. And then they write a script. And that script goes into a team to approve the script, and it gets fact checked and it gets grammar, spelling, that sort of thing. And then they start pulling clips and license, like we license clips from tons of different places. They'll start assembling it on their timeline, and they'll start to produce their video and then add the script in, and then it gets voiced, and then it's ready to get published. That's how an original video gets made. If you're working on one of the international editions, take Spanish, what they'll do is they'll download the zip file of the original project from our tool set. They'll unzip it, they get the project file from the English, and then they translate it into Spanish and they revoice it. They might, if it's a video, they might find clips that are a bit more appropriate for their audience. And then all of the international editions are managed by one person who is making recommendations on what's trending, what's popular in the English channels. And all of that is now completely virtual. We haven't been back to our corporate headquarters since March. And we're using tools like Monday.com and Slack, and then proprietary tools we built ourselves that integrate into those.
No, it's really impressive that you've built this process and this engine that allows you to create content, great content at scale in a
Thank you.
unified approach. I can only imagine at the very beginning when you were a small company, you guys probably didn't sleep trying to do all this work and also create lots of content, and it's impressive. It's really impressive.
Oh, thank you.
This is a theme in the content space that is, depending on who you talk to and what category or what type of content they're producing and their method of distribution, it varies. This concept of quantity versus quality, and how do you balance that? And it seems like you guys have figured out the right mix, but is there a right mix? Does it depend on the type of content you're producing or the distribution channel? What is your guys' right mix that you found for your content?
Yeah, we seem to have tested everything from like length of headlines to duration of video, time in which you post, frequency of which you post. And we've settled on what we've settled on by simply trial and error. Take What If. We're producing 16 videos a month for What If and 8 on Snapchat. I think about 25 to 30 of those go up on Facebook. The top 14 or 15 go on YouTube. The top 8 go on Snapchat. We throw our entire process out the window if there's a trending topic. We have a process for that where we have to jump on a topic really fast, and some of this gets thrown out the window. We've tried at times to try and publish every day, and it didn't have the impact that you might expect. So we've settled on some of these numbers just through trial and error. And underneath that is unit economics too, that are trying to drive. We're a profitable company. We're in it for the content, but it's the profit that allows that to happen. So we're always looking at the unit economics of things as well.
Really interesting. I want to now focus on your distribution strategy of content. And there's this unique set of companies that are emerging in the content space. Some of them are already quite large, that are 100% focusing on creating content solely to distribute through social channels. Why did you guys decide that was the route for you versus creating your own platform and your own interface or your own portal for your users to visit your content? Why solely social channels?
Yeah, good question. I think it might have something to do with the time in which we started and launched. In 2016, 2017, if you remember, everybody was talking about Facebook video, and you could get massive reach quickly. We were definitely intrigued by that. And we discovered the format we created works really well on YouTube, and it works really well on Snapchat. We were intrigued by the business model, first of all, that you could just put lots of digital channels together, connect it into your bank account, feed it with content, and start making money. That model was very interesting. Where if we were going to create our own brand and our own channel, it's a much harder road to go down. If you think of it in 2021, there's lots of companies out there that have created a mobile app, or they're driving traffic to a website, or they're trying to drive traffic to an OTT channel. Now you're in the conversion. You're trying to convert fans from your social channels into another place, your owned and operated channels. And that takes a lot of marketing dollars. I think of like Curiosity Stream. I think they do 75 million in revenue annually, and they spend 35 million acquiring new subscribers. That theme, that trend, that's like across the board. I believe it was in 2019, TikTok spent $1 billion advertising TikTok on Instagram. If you want to move people from one platform to another platform, one that is not native to that platform, you got to spend a lot of money. So if we wanted to do an Underknown channel, which we imagine having in a couple of years, we would certainly have to raise capital. We'd have to have some compelling story for fans to download an app or go to our OTT channel. And then most importantly, there'd have to be enough dollars, like we'd have to be subscribing dollars. So you can spend 10 to make 30 and play that game of converting subscribers. So we're just getting into that stuff now. We created a book in late 2020, and we built marketing funnels to convert our fans to people buying books. It did really well. We're looking at other things like science kits this year. Science Kit's nice because it's a subscription product, so you can scale your ad buying, but it's very difficult, I think, today in 2021 to move people from one platform to the other.
This is an interesting, thought, because this is where it seems as though a lot of creators are trying to figure out how to balance the two, whether or not if you move off of social networks or platforms that people use a lot, you lose the discovery aspect of people finding you and reading your content. But then at the same time, if you haven't figured out that monetization strategy on these social platforms, it's tough to sustain long term. And then it begs the question: you think the route is leverage these platforms as as more of a marketing tool and pull them off towards, whether it's pushing them towards content that they have to pay for, or products that they have to buy, or build up enough presence on these channels where then you can actually monetize through brand advertising or some form of advertising?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think the solution's unique to each company and what maybe their secret sauce, their capabilities are. I hear lots of stories of, people making 75% of their revenue through programmatic advertising, 25% through e-commerce. Some are putting some premium content behind a paywall and then charging a subscription. It's a mix. We are primarily focused on programmatic advertising, and we do some brand deals as well. We'll integrate brands into our videos, but we're really focused on that ad unit number. I mentioned we did 1 billion ad views last year. We're hoping to double that this year, and that the CPM rates go up. That's the great amplifier. You go from $3 CPM to 4 to 5. Has a marked difference in your overall revenue. But we do see long-term putting premium content, building OTT channels, and building a brand around the company Underknown, and not necessarily. And of course, people know the digital channels, but we'll be driving down a funnel but that's longer term.
Interesting. I wanted to just get your thoughts on, earlier you mentioned when we were talking about quantity and quality of content, you mentioned that you publish a certain quantity of videos on different social platforms depending on their audience's engagement. And I'm just curious, do you actually have to reach audiences differently on each platform? Does the content actually have to change, or is it relatively easy to just create content, distribute the same content across the board?
I think you would probably have greater success if you created content for each platform individually, but your unit economics fail. It's very hard to scale and do that. So we actually do, we make small, we tell the same story on all platforms, but we do change small things. Like on YouTube, the aspect ratio is 16:9, like our screen. On Facebook, it's 4:5. It's almost a square. On Snapchat, it's 9:16. It's completely vertical. We changed the first minute on Snapchat, or the first few seconds on Snapchat. On YouTube, we do a lot of promotion of the upcoming video or follow. And so there's a small amount, but the story is primarily the same. And that's primarily, it's a business decision.
It makes sense. I'm curious, are you worried about relying on these social networks as your means of distributing content?
I certainly am. But then I'm a history fan. I'm a big fan of history. And what has helped me, I think, is to study the history of media. And then you realize actually it's constantly, as much as it changes, it stays the same. If you were a broadcaster and you were getting subscription revenue from people, then you're in some ways beholden to the Verizons of the world and the different broadcast networks. If you have a website, you're beholden to Google. If you are running an OTT channel or a mobile app right now, you have to find new users by buying advertising on these platforms. So I don't think that situation of being on social platforms isn't unique. Everybody is captive to someone. We've been able to get through algorithm change by focusing on high quality content, factual content, fact-based and verified content. We think that's where things are going, but that's no different than what people have been putting on television for 30, 40 years. And I think platforms are going to come and platforms are going to go. We're really looking hard at TikTok. We know it's the hot platform. We're on there. We got 500,000 followers. We know that's one where it's a very different format. There are not a lot of publishers like us having success on TikTok yet, but they've just announced they're going to increase it from 1 minute to 3 minutes. So why are they doing that? They want watch time. So that lets you start to do some storytelling. And that's where we're quite interested in. When they monetize for publishers on TikTok, we'll be there.
Interesting. Really interesting. One of the things that I noticed when looking at the whole ecosystem is the short form content players that are distributing content or find a theme and distribute content through social channels tend to do really well. I'm just curious from your perspective, why?
I think it's because it's mobile. I think 86% of our views come from the mobile phone. So it really is a new screen. It's a new format. It's in its infancy. Long form, people who are sitting on a couch are more accustomed to watching something for a longer period of time. If you're on your phone, they're just not there for those lengthy times. They want to get in and out and snack content. Something in the 3 to 5 minute range is a really appropriate length. And I think that you have it's also a great storytelling format as well. That length lets you tell stories, which is great.
Interesting. Makes sense. It's a lot of eyes, a lot of individuals looking for content that they can enjoy or consume during the day, especially during specific periods or if they're bored, and it's the easiest format. And to have a compelling story in short form, I think that's what is really appealing to this category, or specifically for companies like yourself, what you're doing. Shifting gears now, I want to talk a little bit more general market questions. You talked about the history of media and how you see it evolve, and I wanted to highlight that a little bit more. We see content evolve in a lot of different ways. We see new platforms and social networks change, and you highlighted a little bit about TikTok and when is the right timing for that. How do you manage these changes? Do you Is your type of content here to stay? Is how do you prepare for this constant evolving, changing interests and eyes and platforms?
Yeah, it's the digital marketing term is like growth hacking, and I think we're always going to have to be growth hacking, trying and experimenting and testing new things, getting onto platforms early when they come out, looking for opportunities to tell stories. And what we've learned from history is that they've always had these same problems. Like William Randolph Hearst in the 120 years ago owned many newspapers, and he had an almost monopoly on the best cartoonists, and he printed cartoons in his magazines and newspapers. And then Paramount Pictures came along and said, let's turn those into motion picture cartoons and then send people to movie houses to watch those same cartoons that are in the magazines and newspapers. And they debated, why would somebody go from the newspaper or magazine where they just read that cartoon to go spend 5 cents to watch the exact same thing on a screen? And they thought, how are we going to send people from the newspaper or magazine to a movie house? And of course, they did, and it was super successful. And then they started making money to create originals. Henry Luce, when he started Time Magazine, for the first 10 years of Time Magazine, all they did was condensed long 3,000, 4,000 word New York Times articles and into 400 words. They created their own language, time verse. So we are making video essays. We're condensing every information down into 3 to 5 minutes. It seems a lot like what Time tried to do. They took 10 years before they made their first original piece of content. So it feels like history is constantly, and I think there's a lot of analogies to our digital channels and brands to the magazine world, where a publisher like ours might own 40 brands, 40 magazines, and your subscriber in the newsstand is now the one subscribed online and sitting there watching them in their feeds. And sometimes just understanding the way it worked in history helps you see the future a little bit.
It really, in that perspective, it feels like history repeats itself. And in this,
yeah,
the exact same thing. It's just slightly different tools and formats.
We're just trying to move people from Facebook to YouTube, or YouTube to Facebook, or possibly from Facebook to buy a book.
I have a couple more questions, Steve. Thank you so much
Sure.
for taking so much time with me. I really appreciate it. Last 2 questions. I'm just curious, has the pandemic affected your business at all?
Yes, it has, certainly. For one, we always had this model of having a core team in Toronto that manages a much larger international team. And we used to go to a headquarters downtown Toronto, and we don't do that anymore. But we used to run the company out of my house. In fact, this room I'm in right now, we got up to 15 people in my house before we moved downtown into an office. And so rather than have people at my house 5 days a week, they were only here 3. So we already had these skills of being able to work remotely. So when we were able to pivot to fully remote. But one thing we realized is that we could not scale our operations with the tools we had, and it became very noisy. So we started to really focus in the pandemic on our workflow tools, and we built out more software tools. We implemented a much stricter workflow, which has reduced the noise that we have working remotely, and it's helping our business in its entirety. One way it's affected us is how we all work together. And then 2, a lot of people, we went into Q2 just with tremendous dread. I remember thinking, what is April 1st going to look like? And because, advertising is always one of the first things that people can pull their ad budgets. But what we noticed was in the field of advertising, everyone took a massive hit, except digital grew 7.5%. It didn't grow and in programmatic video advertising grew, I think, 11%. I think what the pandemic showed us is that all those trends that were underway really have accelerated. And our space, the new media company, a company operating possibly completely remotely, making all the revenue off programmatic video advertising at scale, is a very profitable, valuable business.
Really interesting. I like the points that you mentioned where your team really started to focus in on the process and process improvement, especially since everyone is dispersed. And it's also interesting to see that you're right. In almost every category, it seems like there's has been this trend of switching to different digital tools or formats or moving in a general direction, and that just accelerates.
If this happened in 2008, I think digital advertising would have dropped,
Mm,
but it went up because that's where so much of the dollars were going anyways. Sorry, I cut you off there.
no worries. Interesting. Last question I had for you, Steve. I'm just curious, where do you think the future of social content is going, and what do you see that most people don't?
I think one thing is one what I might see that people don't is really just by studying history, as we've already talked about. It does, you start to realize, wait, this is just it's just another platform. The same things are going to happen and evolve. Like when TikTok came out, everyone's like, what is that? And how do we tell stories on it? And then you hear, well, they're going to go from 1 to 3 minutes. And we're like, of course. And then they're going to want to go even more because you're going to want to keep people watching for longer. So I think that's the thing, is anticipating some of these trends. I think it's safe to say the volatility of platforms is going to happen. It's not like NBC was around for 50 years and you can sell TV programming to them for 50 years. These platforms we're talking about, I think, are going to come and go. Like we might see an entire platform that just go under and new ones pop up. I think there'll be a lot of that. I think that there'll be platforms, and we're seeing it already, like ones that are focused on gamers like Twitch. One thing we've been doing is studying some of the tools where AI helps the content creator scale. So tools that will take in English voiceover and then translate that into 9 languages with the original voice, but in the native language. So I think there's a lot of these tools that are coming that we're watching and keeping an eye on. We're colorizing history using AI tools. That's incredible. Like that makes history accessible now on these platforms. So a lot of those tools, I think AI, everyone talks about it out there, but very seldom is it mentioned in the field of media. And there's some really cool projects going on there that'll help accelerate content creation. And then I think VR has been lingering around for a while, and I think that's something that is going to change the way stories are told on platforms and go from fancy $500 goggles to something much more accessible for everybody. And I don't know where that will take storytelling. That'll be really quite exciting. And who knows from there.
Wow. Awesome.
But it's still the old art of storytelling. That hasn't changed. And I don't think that will change.
Wow. Awesome. Steve, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Before we close out, is there any asks or anything you want to announce or share with the audience at all?
No, I just be well, be safe. Check out underknown.com. That's our corporate website. You'll find some of the shows that we've been talking about here. Yeah, and just follow along. We're quite early on our journey here. We've got big plans and aspirations, and we are as much learning about the industry as it goes. So feel free to reach out, say hi, and we look forward to connecting with the people watching this.
Awesome.
And thanks for your interest in our business.
Of course. And again, for the audience, the reason why we had this interview and this conversation was we spent a lot of time looking at well over 1,000 companies in the content category. And one of the most impressive ones was Underknown, especially from the outside in, it looks like you're a massive company, but you've done incredible things with not only the process in which you create content, your focus on creating some really unique brands and building the brands outward and continuing to find really interesting themes to expand upon and turning those brands into valuable IP that wins Webby Awards, to books and everything else. And also to see how you've just looked at history and understand that you just mentioned now the art of storytelling is just continuing to evolve in a lot of different formats, but roughly it's still the same form of storytelling, and it's just evolving with the different platforms, and you've done that really well, and it's super impressive. Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really
Thank you, Kyle. Great chatting with you.